Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Mark Shaw. We talked back in July of 2021 about a book he published in June 2021 titled Collateral Damage, The Mysterious Deaths of Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen and the Ties That Bind Them to Robert Kennedy and the JFK Assassination. And so he reached out to me to do the show, so I was delighted that he reached out. It's almost near the anniversary of the assassination of JFK. And also his website is Mark Shaw Books. And if you go back and listen to our earlier interview, you can get a list of all of his books. So please go back and listen to that interview. But Mark Shaw has some updates and a major announcement about the book. So Mark Shaw, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you so much, William, for having me again. Great.
Awesome. Well, I'm delighted you're here. So for people who may not have heard that first interview, can you talk about, you've done a lot of books. Can you talk about kind of your writing career and what led you to write Collateral Damage? And then fill us in with what's happened since you published the book.
Sure. Well, I kind of fell into the JFK assassination area by accident. I had written a lot of books, biographies on different subjects and things like that, Mike Tyson and Thomas Merton and Joseph Kennedy and other people and everything. But I knew a man named Melvin Belli, who was a lawyer in San Francisco. I actually practiced law with him a little bit in the 1980s. For those people that don't know, well, he was this bigger-than-life character, represented the Rolling Stones and Tammy Faye Baker and Errol Flynn. And when I wrote that biography of him, I learned about his most famous client. His main client was Mickey Cohen, who was a Los Angeles gangster of some renown in the 60s, 50s, and 60s. And so that kind of led me to look at the 1960 election, because I wondered about Belli having been chosen to represent Jack Ruby when Ruby was arrested for, of course, shooting Lee Harvey Oswald. And that representation didn't make sense to me, William, because Belli was mostly represented celebrities. He sued pharmaceutical companies. He was a tort lawyer.
He was known as the king of torts, right? That was his
king of torts, exactly.
Title,
yeah, good memory. And he had never really tried criminal cases, especially a capital case. All at once, he's Jack Ruby's lawyer. So I started looking into that and found out the affiliations of Belli with some of the mafia, including Mickey Cohen. So that got me to thinking, what really happened there at the Jack Ruby trial? But that led me back then to the 1960 election. And as you know, it was a close contest between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon. And Joe Kennedy, the Poison Patriarch, I wrote a book called The Poison Patriarch about him. He knew they were going to lose that election unless they won West Virginia and Illinois. So Joe called in some of his chits with those underworld characters that he'd known when he was bootlegging and all of that. He used Frank Sinatra as the go-between, and he recruited basically some of the main mafia in the country, including Sam Giancana, Santo Trafficante, and one in New Orleans named Carlos Marcello. And so one thing led to another, but they helped them win that election, the 60 election, with the promise that Joe made when they were in the White House, they'd leave those gangsters alone. And right away, unfortunately, there was a double cross, because Joe, with that big ego of his, decided that he would force JFK to appoint Bobby Kennedy Attorney General. And Bobby Kennedy had never really set foot in a courtroom, but he wanted Bobby to be Attorney General. And predictably, because Bobby Kennedy hated those mafioso from his days on the McClellan racketeering committee and everything, he went after them, and specifically Carlos Marcello. So what I proved in The Poison Patriarch is that's what's happened. And then I went and I was able to look at the Jack Ruby trial in a more complex way than I had before, because I was suspect of what Ruby had done at trial. And as you may remember, he tried to use what they called a psychomotor epilepsy insanity defense. And even saying that, nobody understands what it means. And of course, the jury didn't. And he wouldn't let Ruby testify. And I thought, well, I'm a curious guy like you are, William. I'm going to go back to that trial and see what happened. And I was introduced then to the key to my next 3 books, including Collateral Damage, about the JFK assassination, when I learned about a woman, remarkable woman, named Dorothy Kilgallen. And for those that don't remember her, well, for those who do remember her, it may be because she was a central character, the big star, on the CBS program, What's My Line? It was a quiz show aired on CBS for almost 15 years on Sunday nights, live from New York. And she was on a panel there. They guessed people's unusual occupations. And yet, when I was working on the Belli book, I had learned from a friend of Belli's who said to me, hey, you know, Belli knew Dorothy Kilgallen. And I said, well, wait a minute, from What's My Line? He said, Mark, you don't know anything about her. She was a famous journalist for the New York Journal American, syndicated to 200 newspapers across the country. She covered the Dr. Sam Shepard case that became The Fugitive, the Charles Lundberg case. She was called the most powerful female voice in America by the New York Post. And Mark, she covered the Jack Ruby trial. So learning about Dorothy then led to my bestseller, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, because what I learned was she was at that trial. She was the only one to interview Ruby, and she had figured out by the end of that trial that there was no Oswald alone theory that made any sense, that it was a plot to kill the president, and she focused in on Carlos Marcello as the one who would have had the strongest motive to have killed JFK. And how did I figure that out? Well, I just used common sense, because when Bobby Kennedy became Attorney General, he immediately illegally deported Marcello to Central America. Now, Marcello got back in the country, and when he did, then RFK charged him with racketeering. So as the fall of 1963 came along, here was Marcello, who was either going to prison or going to be deported, and he couldn't let that happen. In fact, we'll talk about a new FBI file that I found about Marcello, who had an empire that was probably worth at least $30 million in 1963, and that was much more money than it would be, you would think about. So he couldn't really lose that empire. So what did he decide to do? Well, he hated Bobby, but if he killed Bobby Kennedy, then what would happen? JFK would come after him with everything the government had. So he was a smart guy, Marcello. He decides he'll orchestrate the death of JFK so Bobby will be powerless. And that's exactly what happened. And I was able to confirm that with Bill Alexander, who was the main prosecutor of Jack Ruby, who told me, hey, I was shocked that JFK got killed. I thought it would be Bobby Kennedy because he had more enemies, obviously, than JFK did. So armed with all that, I wrote The Reporter Who Knew Too Much. I kind of laid out exactly what had happened like a prosecutor would do. And then I got very curious as to why Dorothy Kilgallen mysteriously died in 1965. And what I found out was that she was found in her townhouse in New York City in a bed she never slept in, wearing her hairpiece, her makeup, and makeup and all of that, when that's not what she would have worn to bed. They came and found her dead and said it was immediately an overdose of barbiturates. Now, I've proven since then, and in fact recently, with an interview of Dr. Michael Baden, the famous forensic scientist, whose name I surprised him with on a radio program in New York, was on the autopsy. And I quizzed him and I said, well, how did you know that it was an overdose of barbiturates, circumstances undetermined? And he said, well, we should have never given the information to the media because, Mark, we didn't know how she died. The circumstances were undetermined. But the effect of that was to ruin Dorothy's reputation. There was no investigation whatsoever. And so I started to, in the book, The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, look at that mysterious death. I looked at the autopsy. She did not die of one barbiturate, but a combination of three. And I was able then, with some new evidence, to find out that the man that she had shared her JFK assassination information evidence with was a man named Ron Pataki, and able to prove that he basically set up Kilgallen for the kill because he got in trouble with the mafia over some gambling debts or something else. And I had an eyewitness source who told me all this. And so in order to get himself in trouble, he let them know that Dorothy Kilgallen was writing this book for Random House and that she was going to expose Marcello for orchestrating JFK's death. Well, Marcello couldn't let that happen. So I looked at him as being the main suspect in Dorothy's death. as well as J. Edgar Hoover, because Dorothy was going to also expose the fact that he covered up the death. Followed that up with a book called Denial of Justice, because I had attempted to get an investigation of Dorothy's death. That still hasn't happened, but I'm after it. But also, excuse me, I was able to expose the Jack Ruby trial transcripts in that book, which clearly show that there was a plot to kill the president, because it showed that Jack Ruby had planned to be at the transfer of Ruby from the Dallas police headquarters at a particular time. He admitted on the stand, the members of those people who were on the jury heard the evidence that he had gotten into the basement with the help of the police department. He'd acted like a reporter and all of that. And so Denial of Justice then went ahead and really hooked on to what I'd written in the best-selling Reporter Who Knew Too Much, The Poison Patriarch, and Jack Ruby's Melvin Belli's biography. So how did that stretch then into Collateral Damage? And I think your viewers will be most interested in that. William, we talked about it the last time because I basically did it by accident. I wasn't going to write any more books about the JFK assassination. Enough, Mark. Move on to something else. But then what happened is that I started to think about a question that was being asked of me by people who had either bought those books or had looked at the, I think there's almost 3.5 million now YouTube views of my presentations on my books. And so those people ask one question: is there a connection between Marilyn Monroe's death and Dorothy Kilgallen's? And the first thing that I thought about, and I think you would have as a curious person, is that these three individuals, Dorothy, Marilyn, and JFK, died within 40 months of each other in the early 1960s. Marilyn in 1962, JFK 63, and Dorothy Kilgallen in 65. So I thought, no, I don't think there is a connection, until I was able to find a photograph of Marilyn and Dorothy on the set of a movie in 1960. It was called Let's Make Love, with Yves Montand, the French actor, and they were looking chummy. And then I found, as I always do, and I think you have done with your books, there's one thing that happens that really keys your going forward with an investigation as an investigative reporter. And that was a column by Dorothy Kilgallen, because as you remember, the official verdict by the LA medical examiner was that Marilyn Monroe had committed probable suicide, they called it. And I thought, well, I'm going to look into that. And so I found this column by Kilgallen that really talked about what good spirits that Marilyn was in. She was on the upswing. She was feeling good about herself. She had movie and TV offers. She had basically found, and this was the real key, a love interest with a name bigger than Joe DiMaggio, who you may remember was the famous baseball player for the New York Yankees. And so I thought to myself, this does not sound like a woman who is going to go ahead and commit suicide. I also knew that she had just recently moved into a home, the first home she ever owned. She had just gotten a dog, and she loved animals and all of that. So she was kind of on top of the world. She'd had some Broadway offers and so on and so forth, Las Vegas offers and all of that. And so I really was suspect of her committing suicide. And so what did I do? The same thing that I had done with JFK's death when I proved there was a plot to kill him. I looked at his autopsy, which was very faulty in terms of how it what they decided. And then I looked at Marilyn, and I looked at Dorothy's, and that was a fudged autopsy. In fact, if you really want to cover up a murder, the first place to start is with an autopsy. And when I looked at Marilyn's, at 10 o'clock in the morning after she died on August 4th, 1962, I just got a chill saying that, because she should have never died. She and Dorothy should have never died, either one of them. I get very passionate about it. But on August 4th, 1962, I looked at the certificate of death that they issued in the morning at 10 o'clock. It said overdose of drugs. Then I looked at the autopsy in the afternoon, just a few more hours later, the autopsy report, probable suicide. Well, that really made me wonder what in the world was going on there, because those two things don't, they're contrary to each other. So I went back to that article that Dorothy had written, and I thought, wait a minute, if Marilyn Monroe was killed, if she was murdered, who would have been the main suspect? Who was the bigger name than Joe DiMaggio that she was having a relationship with? And I landed, as I think you would have, William, on John F. Kennedy. Because as most people know, in 1962, she had a relationship, a sexual affair with JFK. It followed the time when she flew to New York and sang happy birthday to his 45th birthday at Madison Square Garden, and they had a love affair. But what I found out with Collateral Damage, and we can stop here if you'd like, and then I'll give you, my ideas as to what happened to her, I landed on Bobby Kennedy. Because other than JFK, the biggest love affair she had in 1962, as I proved through a CIA document and a little-known book that was written at the time, a torrid love affair with Marilyn Monroe. And so I'd landed on Bobby Kennedy, and my instincts, my curiosity took over, and I started to investigate Bobby and Marilyn.
And you said that her room was bugged, right? So somebody was monitoring her at that time in Los Angeles. I think she lived in Brentwood, a really nice
Correct.
part of town, like not a place to be too depressed about living at.
Well, I admit it. I'm not the greatest, the smartest investigative reporter who's ever been around. All this information was out there on the deaths of all three of these individuals in the book. Basically in Collateral Damage, I've reconciled three mysterious deaths, which shouldn't have been mysteries at all if everybody would have paid attention. But in this situation, I had found a CIA document that was very lethal in terms of what it talked about. It was issued actually a day before Marilyn died. And I'm very upset about that when I saw that, because they knew that Marilyn was in danger. And why was that? Because it talks about in the first paragraph the fact that there are wiretapped phone conversation between Dorothy Kilgallen and a friend of hers named, I can't think of his name anyway, one of her very best friends. So obviously Dorothy's phone had been tapped, but it says in that paragraph also that there are conversations that were wiretapped between Bobby Kennedy and Marilyn Monroe. And I didn't make as much out of that as I should have, William, and I'll tell you why in just a few minutes. But the rest of the document talked first in the paragraph, and this came from the conversation between Dorothy, and the man's name was Rothberg. So I call it the Rothberg report in Collateral Damage. It had never been exposed before. It talked about a real connection between JFK, Marilyn, and Dorothy with of all things, their passion for UFO information. Now, I knew that about Dorothy because she had gone to a UFO convention in 1954, I believe it was, in London, and was very interested in UFOs. She wrote an article about it when she came back that I have in the book, and really was believing in her mind that there were those little green men out there or whatever. But it also connected that with Marilyn, who was interested in UFOs, and JFK especially, because it talked about the fact that he had issued documents to the CIA letters to the CIA requesting information about Roswell and the sighting of UFOs and all that other kind of thing. And I was subsequently able to find two documents that one of them had JFK's signature on it, that basically was asking for all that information. And then, so I connected those three in that document, and it was very interesting to me because nobody had ever really connected the life and times and the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, and Marilyn Monroe. But then it was really this lethal information in the next three sentences, William, that showed me that Marilyn Monroe was really in danger. It talked about the fact that through these wiretap conversations, and apparently I didn't make as big a deal out of it as I should have, as I'll tell you in a minute, because I needed a confirmation for the fact that her telephone was wiretapped. But basically it said that, number one, she was going to talk about her love affairs to the media with both Robert Kennedy and JFK. She was going to talk about, if you can imagine, matters of national security that the Kennedys apparently, especially during their love affairs with her, had mentioned including JFK planning the assassination, the killing of Fidel Castro, and even worse than that, there were these kinds of events that were going on where he was leaking this information that shouldn't have been leaked to the wrong people and that kind of thing. So that really was damaging to me, because if Marilyn was going to go to the media with information about the love affairs, that would have been bad enough, because it would have really caused problems with the Kennedys' reputations. But if she went to the media about these matters of national security being leaked to her through pillow talk, or the Kennedys trying to impress her or whatever, that would have destroyed both of their careers. And I'll talk about in a little while the conclusion that we talk about with Collateral Damage. But like you, William, I always want to confirm anything I can with regard to my research. And so I was very fortunate to be able to find kind of an innocuous account of the fact that Marilyn's home in Brentwood had been bugged. And it came from, of all people, Veronica Hamill, the actress, and many people may remember her from Hill Street Blues. But I found a document where she and her husband had bought Marilyn's Brentwood home in 1962. Now, that would have been 9 years after Marilyn died. But the account by Veronica was that they hired a contractor to replace the roof and remodel the house, and the contractor discovered a sophisticated eavesdropping and telephone tapping system that covered every room in the home. So I'm still attempting to talk to Veronica. I've reached out to her representatives and all of that, but basically that was the confirmation there. And so not only did the Rothberg report confirm the torrid love affair between Bobby and Marilyn. I proved he was in Los Angeles on the day she died. Marilyn died and all of that, overcoming an alibi that he had. But also the fact that this torrid love affair, he had actually promised Marilyn, if you can imagine this, William, that he was going to divorce Ethel and marry Marilyn.
Wow. And so he was in deep trouble.
He really was. And I put this in the book because I wanted people to know about this. I really tried to humanize also in the book JFK, Marilyn, and Dorothy, and I do that at the end of the book because I wanted the reader to know what they lost when they died at an early age. For God's sakes, Marilyn died at the age of 36, JFK at 46, and Dorothy at 52. They had so much of their lives to live. And then what we lost by them dying as well. And so
we lost a lot. When JFK got murdered, the whole politics changed. Vietnam, it was a disaster.
People have said we lost our innocence then, and I think that's probably true. So through all that, I had been able to connect the three for the first time. And it was most interesting to me because through the autopsies and all of that, I'd proven that these three people were silenced. That Marilyn basically was the actress who knew too much. Dorothy, the reporter who knew too much. So all of
wasn't there? Sorry to interrupt, but wasn't there like a famous meeting at the Cal Neva with Sinatra where she said that I'm going to tell everything, and that was right before she died, like 2 or 3 days before she died, right?
Excellent point, and thank you for reminding me of that. That's a real interesting supposition. I wish it was more confirmed that it is, but basically there was a couple of eyewitnesses who were there. This was called the Cal Neva Lodge. For those people that don't know, it was on the border of California and Nevada, right up near Lake Tahoe. And Joe Kennedy hung out there. The Kennedys hung out there. Frank Sinatra did. A lot of different mafia did. It was partly owned by Sinatra, as a matter of fact. Well, on the weekend before Marilyn died, and I believe I've proven this in the Collateral Damage book, that Marilyn was there. Sinatra was there. I have a photograph of she, if I'm saying this right, probably the English isn't right, she and Sinatra there. I have a photograph of her with Peter Lawford. Supposedly there were other people there and all of that, but apparently Marilyn got the idea that they were going to pass her around as what she called a piece of meat, and she wasn't going to put up with that anymore. She'd had it, and so she announced there that I'm going to the media with all of this about you Kennedys and using me and all of that, and promising this. And that visual I mentioned about in the book is Marilyn sitting at the telephone in that Brentwood home that she loved just a few days before she dies. And she's calling, and this has been confirmed, JFK, and he won't take her calls. She's calling Robert Kennedy, who's promised to marry her, and he won't take her calls. And you can just imagine her, and again, I get these are human beings, and I get this chill again, because I can see her sitting there crying. These powerful men who have used her for sex and promised her things and everything, are now just dumping her. And so basically what I concluded in it, Collateral Damage, and I'm always interested in what viewers, come back with and tell me whether they think I'm right. But if you think about this on a broader scope, if Robert Kennedy would have been prosecuted for his complicity in Marilyn's death based on strong motive, and I now have an eyewitness who has given me, along with my accounts in the book, as to exactly how Marilyn was died, and we can get into that. If he would have been prosecuted in 1962, what would have happened? Well, enemies, including Marcello, would not have had to have killed JFK to render Bobby powerless, because he would have been powerless since he would no longer have been Attorney General. And and there would have been no JFK assassination. And if you take that a step further, then Dorothy Kilgallen would not have died in 1965, would not have been murdered, because she would have had no JFK assassination to investigate. So the collateral damage, basically, of Joe Kennedy ordering JFK to appoint Bobby Kennedy, then him going after Marcello, and then getting involved with Marilyn Monroe. The collateral damage is the deaths of Marilyn Monroe, Dorothy Kilgallen, and John F. Kennedy.
It's really an incredible story in that it's been kind of covered up for this many years of all those involvements. And it's really just a remarkable, and that whole era, I think Gameplay quoted this on StreamYard, is that there just were so many deaths, cultural deaths, and so many figures in that whole thing. And you talk about also kind of bringing all this up current. I don't know if you still want to stay on the collateral damage, but you talk about how Bobby RFK Jr. is this whole case of RFK getting killed at the Ambassador Hotel. His son is asking for the release of, or the parole of, Sirhan, right?
Yeah, it's a follow-up to what's in collateral damage, because I look at motive as a former criminal defense lawyer and investigative reporter and, legal analyst for the Tyson and the OJ and the Kobe cases and all of that. I look for motive. And, in this kind of situation, the motive of Sirhan has always bothered me. I could never quite figure it out. And so it was interesting, because recently I had already found an FBI file on Marcello that showed how wealthy he was in 1965. Now, again, 65 is when Dorothy died. And the motive there, of course, he couldn't let Dorothy Kilgallen expose him for the death of JFK, because in a book she was writing for Random House, because if she did, then that empire would collapse. So there's his motive. In the new FBI file about Marcello, it talks about how wealthy he was going into 1968. He was a smart businessman. I mean, one of the worst human beings that ever lived, but with all the killings that he ordered and all the things he did, including JFK. But he also was a very smart businessman. And for instance, I found in this new file, they said that basically at that point, his empire may have been worth $70 to $80 million. And that's in 1968 dollars,
Right. Close to $1 billion today or something.
Absolutely. And for instance, he bought land. He had a big estate called Churchill Downs near where he lived. And he bought real estate close to that because he knew that a interstate was going through there. So I've always tried to connect Carlos Marcello to Sirhan. And thus far, I've been completely unsuccessful. I did find out that Sirhan at one point worked as a walking horses at Hollywood Racetrack, and Marcello had an interest in that, but that wasn't enough of a connection for me. And so I'm continuing to try to connect him to the death of Bobby Kennedy, because that motive is so strong. And now I know that he couldn't possibly have let RFK become president. Why? because RFK, as I've proven, told many people that he knew that was Marcello that killed JFK. So predictably, if Bobby Kennedy becomes President, William, then what's he going to do? He's going to come back after Marcello, and Marcello could not let that happen.
Right. So this has to go, and I mean, so there's, I mean, clearly Sirhan's a patsy, and what he did, I mean, there's no real motive for him to have shot Kennedy in any way, shape, or form that anybody can really figure out. I think that, yeah. So there's really sketchy elements there. So Bobby Kennedy Jr. is, and I think there was another Kennedy family member who said that Sirhan should be paroled. So it wasn't just.
Yeah, I have a real problem with this. I'm a big believer in jury verdicts. I was when I was a criminal defense lawyer with murder cases. That's basically what I did. They don't always get it right, but juries most of the time do. And they heard all of the evidence. They heard about the confession by Sirhan and all of that. And yes, I'm dubious of what happened, but that's what they heard, and they decided he was guilty with the sentence death. All right, so now comes along Robert F. Kennedy Jr., and he goes to see Sirhan, and based on what he's told and all this other kind of thing, he gets in the middle of all this parole situation. Yes, there was one Kennedy, I think it was a nephew or something, who supported him, but many of the Kennedy family is just enraged that he did this. So there's two parts to that situation and everything. What concerns me more here is that I have asked the Los Angeles District Attorney George Gaston to investigate Marilyn's death. There was no investigation at the time. They covered it up and all of that. And so I've written him 3 letters. One of them's up on my website, markshawbooks.com, because I found out that when and one of the reasons I was amazed that he wasn't looking into Marilyn's death, because I sent him a 375-page evidence report. I sent him a copy of Collateral Damage. Please investigate her death, reinvestigate her death. I didn't hear from him. And then I learned out why. Because when he had to make comments about the Sirhan case, and if you read them, this is not anybody who can independently look at Marilyn's death, because what did he say? I idolized the Kennedys. I really was inspired by Bobby Kennedy, who I thought would make a great president. Well, for God's sakes, then, he's not going to look into a case where Bobby Kennedy is the main suspect. So another cover-up has happened, and I'm going to continue to go forward and attempt to get justice for both Dorothy and for Marilyn. And you mentioned at the top of the show, and if you don't mind my mentioning it as well, one of the ways that this is going to happen is because I've been so blessed, not only with my body of work being archived at my alma mater, Purdue University, but also because Mark Wahlberg, the actor-producer, Academy Award actor-producers research production company in Los Angeles, Unrealistic Ideas, has optioned the media rights to Collateral Damage so that they can go ahead. There's the headline in this Hollywood publishing. It's a big deal out there. A deadline about the unrealistic option of my book. And they're going to turn it into a documentary film. And I think a part of that, obviously, as it even says in the article, will look into my research and look into the great possibility that through this research and a documentary, we can get a reinvestigation of Marilyn's death. So I'm not going to give up on that, just as I'm not going to give up on trying to get justice for Dorothy Kilgallen.
That's congratulations. This is a huge honor. I mean, it's really incredible, because this is one of those things where I probably will be produced, unlike other projects that kind of sometimes flounder or don't make it. I would expect to see this in the near future. So awesome.
Well,
that's a great achievement.
I was very impressed with the people that I worked with there. Mark Wahlberg is a man of integrity, and these people are as well. And so I got them to agree, and there's no absolute guarantee that they would follow what I wrote in the book. And that meant a lot to me, because I didn't want, it's amazing to me. Do you realize there is going to be a film released next year called Blonde, based on the book, where the author basically admits that it's not based on any accuracy. They're not worried about accuracy. The film is going to be the same thing. They're going to, fictionalize basically Marilyn's story. And it's just, it's such disrespect to somebody like her, just as it would be if there was a movie made about Dorothy, and I'm continuing to try to work on that. So I'm inflamed by those kinds of things. I hope that for some reason that movie never makes it to the screen.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen so many films come out of Hollywood that don't have the integrity to the source material that it's a disappointment when that happens. And regarding Marilyn's death, what new evidence have you uncovered about exactly how she died and by whom on August 4th, 1962?
Well, first of all, I see one of your viewers has said good luck on the documentary and had some other nice comments, and I really appreciate that. Thanks so much. Another nice compliment. Thank you. Well, here's the situation. In the book Collateral Damage, I don't want to give it away because I want people to read it and then make up their own mind. That's what I like to do, make people stop and think about what I put in my books. But I give what I believe is a plausible way as to how Marilyn was silenced on the evening of August 4th and the morning of August 5th of 1962. Bobby Kennedy would not have been involved deliberately or with himself on that death. So he would probably, in my opinion, logically have used operatives. And so what I say in the book, based on 3 clues that I came up, having to do one in her autopsy where she had a bruise on her hip, a fresh bruise on her hip. Second, that when the police came, the housekeeper was washing laundry at the washing machine in the middle of the night, which didn't make a lot of sense. And the third is there was no glass found where she could have taken these pills, and the amount of pills that she supposedly took, almost 50, she would have died much sooner than they estimated that she died. So in the book, I try to show exactly how these operatives came to her home, and one way or another, in my opinion, giving my opinion in the book, they were able to ingest those barbiturates into her blood system, into her body, not by her ingesting them through water, but another way. And I don't want to get into that, as I say, so that people can make up their own mind. But obviously, the clues there may give you an idea as to exactly how Marilyn was murdered. So that was my conclusion in the book. Well, I came to find a couple more very, very interesting confirmations for how Marilyn died. One of them came from June DiMaggio, Joe DiMaggio's mother. There's a book that I found that has never really gotten much attention, and that happens a great deal, it seems like to me, to find those. But it talks about that June DiMaggio and Marilyn, even when Joe and Marilyn divorced, became and was still very good friends with Marilyn. And she says in the book, and it seems to make sense, that on the night that Marilyn died, she was on the telephone with Marilyn. And they were talking about her plans and how things were going, and Joe, and in fact, the potential that Joe and Marilyn were going to be married again, and it would have actually been on the same day that was Marilyn's funeral, which is really disturbing to me, because that obviously never happened. But she was talking to Marilyn, and then she heard a scream, and then she heard some noise in the background, and then she thought she heard something about Kennedy, and all of that. And finally then the phone, and remember, a phone that had not been hung up was found in Marilyn's hands when she died. And basically then, June DiMaggio hung up. So that was an account that I felt was credible. Sure, she had some connection to Marilyn through Joe and all of that, but that was the one that really made me think, all right, what I surmised in the book makes sense. And then I found a woman in Boston, near Boston, who had got in touch with me by looking at one of the documentaries. There's almost 700,000 views up on YouTube of my presentations and interviews on Collateral Damage, and people can go take a look at those. But she had watched one of them, and she called me and she said, Mark, I have some explosive news for you. My father was associated with the underworld in Massachusetts. He and his son had opened a ski resort not too far from Boston. I'm not sure exactly where it was, but he was friends with a lot of the so-called mafioso in the area. And one night when I was about 15 years old, I believe it was, or 16 or something. He brought a couple of those guys home, and they started drinking and everything else like that. My dad finally got tired and went to bed, but these two men started talking, and somehow or another, Marilyn Monroe's death came up. And the two of them obviously inebriated a bit, but she said they made sense, said, well, here's what happened. We didn't do it. We weren't responsible, but two of our buddies out in Los Angeles were contacted by Robert Kennedy. And when he went to Marilyn's home with Peter Lawford, and I've proven, by the way, that Marilyn was at Peter Lawford's beachfront home in Santa Monica. I have a photograph that I can show you. That she was there in summer of 1962. That what Bobby did is one way or the other, he left one of the windows open. And when those operatives then came to the home of Marilyn, they used the open window to get in, and then they went on and, as I say then, poisoned her with the barbiturates and all of that. So I've got two, I think, realistic confirmations of my conclusions in the book. People can make up their own mind. I've sent all that to the LADA, but so far he hasn't responded to me, but I'm going to keep after him. But I think those are logical ways of how Marilyn could have very well died, unfortunately, a tragic death in 1962.
Yeah, no, it's really remarkable. And the interesting thing is the past is still present, because you mentioned something about Biden's approach to the JFK files. Can you talk about that before we close it up?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's just mind-boggling. In previous presidents, from the most recent one to Obama, back to, back and back. All right, there is a law that said they had to have, what was it, by whenever it was, what year it was. Anyway, they had to release all of the JFK documents that hadn't been released. I think it was last year or something that they had to. Well, anyway, all those presidents basically didn't release them, and they used the excuse that it was there were problems with matters of national security. Now, that seemed to me a lame excuse, but then Biden went ahead, and you had to read what the reason was. First of all, he said that the National Archives hadn't had time because of the pandemic to copy all of the documents. Come on, for God's sake.
That probably means they have more time to do that, actually.
I would think so. But worse than that, here's the reason, William, that he gave for not releasing the documents. Now, we go through these slowly. Protect against identifiable harm to the military defense. What? Intelligence operations. What? Law enforcement or the conduct of foreign relations. What in the hell can that have to do with documents about the JFK assassination? What, next Monday, I believe, it'll be 58 years. Identifiable harm to the military defense, intelligent operations, law enforcement, or the conduct of foreign relations.
It's the kitchen sink. They just said it was everything, right? It could be anything.
So come on, these and I even saw, and again, I don't want to applaud too many members of the Kennedy family because I'm not a fan of theirs, but they're enraged. Bobby Kennedy Jr. came out and said, and they don't know what's in there. Come on, release these so we can figure out exactly what happened. Here's what I think. It's all going to be Oswald alone stuff again, just like the Warren Commission and their stupid conclusion that they had that was made, was just the cover up by J. Edgar Hoover. It's all going to be that kind of cover up information about the Oswald alone file, and somehow or another, it's not going to be anything that's going to shed light on what really happened in 1963.
And it's still an important question to this day. I mean, the public deserves to know all the facts, the real facts, not the Warren Commission facts. But is there anything else you'd like to add or anything I missed before we wrap it up? And just before we do wrap it up, I just want to say again, congratulations on this documentary transaction. It's really great. I'm looking forward to it.
I'm just about the most blessed man on the face of the earth, and I'll tell you, this is a real blessing, a real honor as well. Just this, because many people today say, why is the JFK assassination important? Why do we care about whether Dorothy Kilgallen was overdosed on drugs or murdered, or Marilyn Monroe committed probable suicide or not? Why do we care? Well, it's relevant because it's history. And there's so many distortions of history out there. The sixth floor museum at Daley Plaza, it's a shrine to Lee Harvey Oswald. They won't permit anything to the contrary. There's a lot of books out there, unfortunately, that distort history about what happened with all of this. And so I have on my and justice being denied to these two women especially. I have on my wall by my writing table here a quote that it's kind of been my credo: "The death cannot cry out for justice. It is the duty of the living to do so for them." So everybody needs to care here. And what happened back then that we can learn from is that no questions were asked. Everybody accepted the Oswald alone theory. When Dorothy died, they accepted that, hey, this is another celebrity who overdosed on drugs. Right. And with Marilyn, well, this is the sex pot, and she did all this and that. And so, yeah, it's predictable because she had all these mental problems. And she didn't, by the way. She was on the upswing, but this is just, she probably committed suicide. So they didn't go ahead and ask questions. And there has never been a more important time in our history to ask questions about everything. I really tell people to do that. With everything, politics, business, whatever it is, ask questions, because you can't accept anymore at face value what's being told to us, whether it's television, radio, whatever it is. You got to ask questions.
Really important, and a great book. And thanks for returning, Mark. And again, your website is markshawbooks.com. If people want to reach out to you, can they do it through your website?
Yes, but I answer every single email that comes my way, and it's an easy email. It can be found on the website, but it's mshawin@yahoo.com, MSHAWIN at Yahoo. And I would encourage your viewers to get in touch with me, because many times those that watch or listen give me tips that I follow up, and they've made a lot of difference in my investigations.
Mine too. I've had really excellent emails. Most of the emails I get are superb, and people just put another little piece of the puzzle for me. Again, it's MSHAWIN at yahoo.com.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'll put that in the show notes. Again, the book we just talked about is Collateral Damage: The Mysterious Deaths of Marilyn Monroe and Dorothy Kilgallen, and the Ties That Bind Them to Robert Kennedy and the JFK Assassination, published June 1st, 2021. And look for the documentary, hopefully in the near future. So, Mark Shaw, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you so much, William. You're a good man. Thank you.
Likewise. Stay there.